This is live from New Delhi. You're watching DT India News Hour, India's voice to the world. I'm Sakal Bhatt, and coming up in the next hour. Kenyan President William Ruto rejects controversial finance bill, sends it back to Parliament following violent protests across the country. Om Birla elected as Speaker of India's lower house again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi says 17th Lok Sabha under his leadership will be called a golden period in country's parliamentary history. And Indian markets set a new peak. Sensex, Nifty settle at new all-time high. And Julian Assange returns to Australia from Saipan as a free man after pleading guilty for violating the US espionage law. Australia's Albanese thanks US and UK for their support. National Democratic Alliance nominee Om Birla was elected as the Lok Sabha Speaker on Wednesday after a motion moved by Prime Minister of India Narendra Modi was adopted through voice votes. Dibyendu Mondal's report for DD India on the first sitting of 18th Lok Sabha or lower house of the Parliament of India.
The first sitting of the 18th Lok Sabha continued through Wednesday. The Parliament convened at 11 a.m. to elect the Speaker of the newly elected Lok Sabha or the lower house of the Indian Parliament. Prime Minister Narendra Modi proposed the name of Om Birla as the NDA candidate to be elected as the Speaker of the 18th Lok Sabha. This was seconded by the Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, Home Minister Amit Shah and other senior ministers of the Modi government. Even the NDA alliance partners supported Om Birla on the floor of the House to be elected as the Speaker. On the other hand, the Congress proposed K. Suresh as the candidate of the UPA alliance to be elected as the Speaker of the Lok Sabha. This motion was supported by the Samajwadi Party, the Nationalist Congress Party Sharad Pawar faction and other partners of the opposition alliance. The motion was put to vote on the floor of the House and through a voice vote, Om Birla was declared as the elected Speaker of the 18th Lok Sabha. Soon after his election, Prime Minister Narendra Modi praised the Speaker for his successful term in the 17th Lok Sabha.
संसद में जो ऐतिहासिक निर्णय हुए आपकी अध्यक्षता में सदन के माध्यम से जो सुधार हुए हैं ये अपने आप में एक सदन की भी और आपकी भी विरासत है और भविष्य में 70वीं लोकसभा के संबंध में जब विश्लेषण होंगे उसके विषय में लिखा जाएगा तो भारत के भविष्य को नई दिशा देने में आपकी अध्यक्षता वाली 70वीं लोकसभा की बहुत बड़ी भूमिका रही है.
The Speaker Om Birla took the chair for the second time on Wednesday. This was the third time since independence and the first time since 1976 that this post went into elections. The 9-day Parliament session would conclude on July 3rd with the motion of thanks to the President's inaugural address on Thursday. Dibyendu Mondal's report for DD India.
The ruling BJP-led NDA nominee Om Birla was elected as the Speaker of the lower chamber of India's Parliament for the second consecutive term by the voice vote on Wednesday, as we reiterated in our report. DD India's Nupur Praveen gets us more on his political journey so far.
Om Birla has been re-elected as the Speaker of the 18th Lok Sabha through a voice vote after Prime Minister Narendra Modi moved the motion in the House. Birla defeated the opposition's candidate and 8-term Congress MP Koti Kunal Suresh through a voice vote. as he began a historic second consecutive term as the Speaker of the lower chamber of India's Parliament. Birla urged parliamentarians to carry out proceedings while maintaining the decorum of the House.
कि संसद में विरोध और सड़क के विरोध में अंतर होना चाहिए। हमें जनता ने चुनकर भेजा है संसद के लिए, इसलिए मेरी अपेक्षा रहेगी कि हम विरोध के तरीके को संसद की मर्यादा के अनुरूप अपनाएं।
Born on November 23, 1962 in Rajasthan's Kota city, Om Birla's political career started as the district president of the BJP's youth wing in Kota in 1987. He served as a member of the Rajasthan Legislative Assembly, representing the Kota South Assembly constituency from 2003 to 2014. In 2014, Birla became a Member of Parliament from the Kota Bundi constituency and was elected as the Speaker of the Indian Parliament's lower chamber in 2019 for the first time. During his last tenure as the Speaker, productivity of the 17th Lok Sabha stood at a record 97%. The Parliament withstood the COVID-19 pandemic and passed the Women's Reservation Bill 2023 and scrapped Article 370 among other key decisions made. In the very first parliamentary session in 2019, all first-time members got an opportunity to speak, and during the first session's 0 hour, members raised 1,066 subjects, a record for any one session in the history of the Lok Sabha. Birla was the first speaker to provide lawmakers with clippings of their speeches to help them circulate it on social media. As many as 179 bills were passed when Birla was the Speaker of the House, with 58% of those passed within 2 weeks of introduction. The shifting of the Parliament from the colonial era building to the new building is perhaps the biggest highlight of Birla's first tenure. With Om Birla's re-election as Speaker, his proven track record of fostering productivity and innovation in India's Parliament promises continued progress and effective governance for the 18th Lok Sabha. Bureau Report, DD India.
And in some other news, Government of India has implemented rules under certain sections of the new Telecommunications Act on Wednesday. This new act will replace the old regulatory framework of the existing Indian Telegraph Act 1885, Wireless Telegraphy Act 1933 and Telegraph Wire Illegal Occupancy Act 1950. With this, the government will now be able to take control of telecommunication services on the basis of security, public order or prevention of crimes. The act has also outlined strict provisions regarding mobile SIM cards. The new act was approved by both the Houses of Parliament in December last year.
प्री इंडिपेंडेंस एरा के एक्ट्स थे जिसके तहत अभी तक टेलीकॉम सर्विसेज गवर्न होती थी, उनको सबको बदल करके अभी एक नया आधुनिक एक्ट लाया गया है जिसमें कि जो टेलीकॉम सेक्टर है उसकी ग्रोथ और उसमें ईज़ ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस और उसके बेटर रेगुलेशन के प्रावधान किए गए हैं। जो पुराने समय में लाइसेंस की पद्धति थी उसको बदल के अब ऑथराइजेशन का प्रावधान इसमें किया गया है।
More than 300 organizations and 200 speakers from more than 30 countries are participating in the 3rd Annual Indian Space Congress in Delhi. The event is dedicated to encourage Indian startups in space industry to form joint ventures with foreign markets.
Thousands of new technology development activities did happen in our organization as new initiatives, so that at least in the next few years we will be a little bit better than that we were in the past. This is one important step that we need to do. We also want to make sure that the production realization activity that we do in a continuous manner with our engineers need to transition into industry. And this effort is being done in hand in hand with partners of InSpace and NSIL.
The Australian envoy to India, Mr. Philip Green, described India as a top-tier strategic partner, not just in defence, but space as well.
We now describe India as a top-tier strategic partner, along with our partners in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Japan. India is now for us in that very elite company. We engage with you through the Quad, bilaterally through our defence and intelligence services, and we are in the business of delivering greater strategic trust between Australia and India.
A special session was dedicated to the impact of advancing satellite technology and new regulations on TV broadcast media. And still to come on DD India News Hour, coming up next, this is what we have for you. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange finally walks out as a free man after more than a decade. NATO allies appoint outgoing Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte as its next Secretary General. Russia announces to block at least 81 European Union media outlets.
Nature also finds these uninvited guests quite unpleasant. Let's try to find out how to deal with these uninvited guests in the best way possible.
That you just add water to the container and then there is a killing ingredient inside which ensures that those adults do not emerge out from that, so the force multiplier gets reduced.
The red fire ant. We need to take immediate action to prevent it from spreading further, so we can keep the red fire ant under control. The damage to agriculture is massive.
We're looking to develop pest control techniques that can be used on a large or small scale and on different plants.
You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Sakal Bhatt. Moving on to some other big stories. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange finally walks out as a free man after fighting a long-drawn legal battle spanning more than a decade. His arrival in Australia on Wednesday marked a special moment as he was reunited with his family. Assange pleaded guilty to breaching US espionage laws, effectively ending years of uncertainty and legal challenges. Rahul Upadhyay of DD India gets us more.
Finally, he was reunited with his family after 14 years. WikiLeaks' founder, Julian Assange, arrived in Australia as a free man on Wednesday after pleading guilty to violating US espionage law in a deal that sets him free from a 14-year legal battle. Assange disembarked from a private jet at Canberra Airport just after 7:30 p.m., 11:30 GMT. He embraced his father before entering the terminal building with his legal team. Stepping off a private jet at Canberra Airport, Julian Assange acknowledged the waiting media with a wave. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on Wednesday thanked the United States and the United Kingdom for their support, securing the release of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange.
He described it as a surreal and happy moment. He's landing here in our national capital, Canberra. He expressed his thanks to what he described as the diplomatic A-team when I spoke about the role that Kevin and Stephen have been able to play.
Assange's UK and Australian lawyer Jennifer Robinson thanked the Australian government for its years of diplomacy in securing Assange's release.
Today is a historic day. It brings to an end 14 years of legal battles. And finally, after 14 years of legal battles, Julian Assange can go home a free man. This also brings to an end a case which has been recognised as the greatest threat to the First Amendment in the 21st century.
Sydney residents were pleased with the return.
Oh, it's great news. Obviously, it's just been way too long. I feel he's just been held accountable for more, and in hindsight, he's been punished more than what he needed to be. So, you know, it's great news for him, it's great news for his family, it's great news for all of the supporters in Australia. I think everybody wanted to see this and wanted to see it a long time ago.
Assange's arrival marks the conclusion of a saga during which Assange spent over 5 years in a high-security British jail and 7 years seeking asylum at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. During this time, he fought extradition to Sweden over sexual assault allegations and to the US where he faced 18 criminal charges. Rahul Upadhyay's report, DD India.
French President Emmanuel Macron has welcomed Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban at the Elysee Palace in Paris on Wednesday, ahead of the Hungary's EU presidency amid tensions over support for Ukraine. France will turn over the rotating EU Council presidency to Hungary on 1st of July, and Budapest will be holding it until December 31st, 2024. Macron and Orban are also meeting ahead of the Brussels summit on June 27-28, where the EU leaders will discuss the strategic agenda 2024 to 2029, the next institutional cycle, Ukraine, the Middle East and security-related matters. Well, NATO allies have appointed outgoing Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte as its next Secretary General. The alliance's soon-to-be former head hailed his successor as a true transatlanticist, and the Dutch politician has also described his appointment as a tremendous honour, quote-unquote, whose appointment was sealed by NATO ambassadors during a meeting at the 32-nation alliance's headquarters in Brussels recently. Now, he will be assuming his functions as NATO chief from 1st of October 2024. Remember, decks were cleared for Rutte's eventual appointment to the top NATO position after his only rival, the Romanian president, Los Iohannis, stepped out of the running. I get you more in this report. NATO will have a new boss amidst critical juncture for European security as war continues to rage in Ukraine. NATO has appointed Mark Rutte as its next Secretary General, putting the outgoing Dutch Prime Minister in charge of the world's biggest security organization. Hailing the change of guard, Jens Stoltenberg, outgoing NATO Secretary General, called him as true transatlanticist and consensus builder, adding he has left the reins in safe hands. Mark Rutte is a fierce critic of Russian President Vladimir Putin and a staunch ally of Ukraine. Meanwhile, Kremlin was quick to react to the development, calling Rutte's appointment as inconsequential and unlikely to change the alliance's overall stance.
This choice can hardly change anything in the general line of NATO, the Euro-Atlantic Alliance, which both individually, we mean the member countries under the direct leadership of the United States, and together as the North Atlantic Alliance, are working to strategically suppress the Russian Federation. It is an alliance that is an enemy to us.
57-year-old Mark Rutte has been one of the driving forces behind Europe's military support for Ukraine since Russia's 2022 invasion, calling Moscow's defeat vital for Europe's peace. Rutte cemented his bid to become NATO's new chief last year, while co-leading an international coalition committed to deliver Fighter 16 fighters, F-16 fighters to Ukraine and train Ukrainian pilots. Sakal Bhatt's report for DD India. And DD India's William Denslow joins us more on this story. William, thank you very much for joining us live from Brussels. Now, how significant is this change of guard, particularly coming at this very critical juncture, you would agree, where tensions continue to simmer between Russia and Ukraine? In a sense, what all does Mark Rutte bring to the table?
Well, certainly NATO is looking for consistency at this critical juncture as the alliance seeks to continue to provide support for Ukraine in its war against Russia. And as far as supporters of the move are concerned, they'll be very pleased with the fact that Mark Rutte is certainly bringing with him a huge degree of experience. He has been the Dutch Prime Minister on 4 occasions in a tenure spanning some 14 years. So an incredibly experienced campaigner with plenty of relationships across Europe, as well as working with various other NATO allies. And Jens Stoltenberg, the outgoing NATO Secretary General, has described him as a strong leader and a consensus builder. Yeah. And it's that issue of consensus that will be absolutely crucial for Mark Rutte going forward, considering the fact that Hungary is a member of NATO. They have been one of the Kremlin's strongest supporters, especially compared to other NATO members. So that'll be a relationship that Mark Rutte will have to deal with very closely indeed. And of course, there is the small matter that just a month or so after he takes the role as NATO chief, there is the US presidential election and the possibility that Donald Trump will take charge in Washington. He, of course, has been a vocal critic of NATO.
Yes, exactly. That was my next point. Rather, Mark Rutte's credentials, known to be fierce critic of Russian president and a staunch ally of Ukraine, which you mentioned. Going forward, we get to see more bad blood between Ukraine and Russia, or a sobering of stance for the fact that Stoltenberg has not only hailed this particular change of guard, but has also said that I'm leaving NATO with safe hands.
We're certainly expected to see a huge amount of consistency from Mark Rutte when he takes over from Jens Stoltenberg. But before Stoltenberg does step aside in October, he has a major objective that he is seeking to achieve in the next month or so. That is, he wants to see more consistency when it comes to providing military support for Kyiv going forward. He has asked NATO members to secure to the tune of $40 billion per year for Ukraine. He says that such a consistent funding for Kyiv in its fight against Russia will show that NATO is willing to play the long game, as indeed is Russia. That's a recent comment we heard from Jens Stoltenberg. So when NATO leaders meet for a high-level summit in Washington next month, that is something that Jens Stoltenberg will be hoping to achieve. That'll be a huge pillar in his Ukraine policy and will make things a lot easier in many ways for Mark Rutte when he takes over, to see that annual funding of $40 billion per year for Ukraine secured.
Yes. Having said that, William, you're following the story so closely. Help us understand, you spoke about consistency. So will Mark Rutte face the challenge of sustaining allies' support for Ukraine, while at the same time guarding against NATO's being drawn directly into a war with Moscow? That's going to be a huge challenge.
Absolutely, and it's a delicate balancing act, and we've seen Jens Stoltenberg have to toe that diplomatic line just in the matter of recent weeks. We've seen him having to make a trip to Hungary, to Budapest, meeting with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, for example. Hungary has been reluctant to provide more military assistance for Ukraine, urging instead for Ukraine's allies to be pushing for a ceasefire rather than more funding, more ammunition, and more military supplies to Kyiv going forward. Mark Rutte, Jens Stoltenberg, rather, however, found a caveat for Budapest, saying that they didn't have to participate in this annual funding for NATO. So that just showed his diplomatic light-footedness in many ways, to be able to keep Budapest from using its power of a veto. So that'll be absolutely crucial for Mark Rutte to try and balance. And on the issue of someone like Donald Trump, should Donald Trump be the next president of the United States, that'll be a very key relationship for Mark Rutte to have to manage. It's been reported that he had a rather decent working relationship when Donald Trump was in the White House, and he's even previously in the past told European leaders to stop moaning about the former president.
Interesting line of thoughts there. But finally, William, Kremlin has certainly downplayed the development, saying that Rutte's taking over will hardly change the alliance's stance. In a way, they're calling it inconsequential, while Rutte says he's highly honored, and so on and so forth. What do you make of Russia's reaction to this?
As far as the Kremlin's concerned, they're really seeing this, as we've heard from these statements, as more of the same, a status quo type of move from NATO, considering the fact that Mark Rutte has been such an established part of the European makeup for so long, being Prime Minister of the Netherlands for in a tenure spanning 14 years. That's an incredibly long time. So he's certainly an entity that Moscow knows very well indeed, will have had relationships with him going forward. They know his stance has been very vocal, as has much of the European Union, when it comes to their fierce criticism of Moscow and its war in Ukraine. So when it comes to Mark Rutte taking over the NATO top job, well, they're not expecting expecting too much to change
Okay.
compared to Jens Stoltenberg. They'll expect Mark Rutte to continue to be a champion for Kiev.
All right, we'll leave it there. Many thanks, William, for helping us understand what does this really mean, change of guard at the top for NATO and Europe as a whole. Well, we're getting some more news from Russia now, where Russia has announced to block at least 81 European Union media outlets. This in retaliation to the bloc's ban against 4 Kremlin news organizations last month. The ban will restrict people inside the country from assessing the outlets and online resources and broadcasting material. The outlets from 25 European countries include pan-European media like Politico, French outlets such as AFP and Liberation newspapers, among others. Russia has accused the outlets of, and I quote, systematically distributing inaccurate information, unquote, about the ongoing conflict. Meanwhile, European Union Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell has condemned Russia's move, calling it totally unfolded decision. And in the most recent of several periodic exchanges, Russia and Ukraine each returned 90 prisoners of war on Tuesday. Russia has reported that the repatriated prisoners had been in grave danger while in captivity, while Ukraine stated that the returnees included soldiers who had defended the Azovstal steel mill in 2022, as well as others captured when Russian forces briefly took control of the decommissioned Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The United Arab Emirates has facilitated the swap as an intermediary. And now let's take a look at other stories making news around the world. Dozens of police officers, rescue teams and drones searched for missing British teen Jay Slater in the steep valley located on the Canary Islands west coast. 19-year-old Slater went missing on June 17 and his phone was last traced in the Masca ravine in a remote national park on the Canary Islands archipelago. Croatian autonomous electric vehicle startup Project Tree Mobility on Wednesday presented its self-driving robotaxi named after French writer Jules Verne ahead of the planned launch in 2026. The startup expects that its fully autonomous 2-seat electric vehicle Verne will be able to run urban robotaxi services. 17, the iconic K-pop group was officially designated as UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for Youth by UNESCO Director General Audrey Azoulay on Wednesday. This appointment follows 17's key participation in its 13th UNESCO's Youth Forum in Paris in November 2023. Hail and heavy rain hit some of the Madrid neighborhoods on Tuesday, causing street flooding and covering roofs with a layer of white ice. Spanish weather agency said on Wednesday that more storms were expected across the country during the next few days. And still to come on DD India News Hour. Coming up next, the top story. Kenya continues to simmer. Military hits ground to contain escalating situation. We will be speaking to the former Indian envoy to Kenya on the show to understand the repercussions of the conflict. "16 Nobel Prize-winning economists warn Trump policies will fuel inflation."
Voice of a rising aspirational world. Stories of challenges, struggles and accomplishment. A world battling conflict, hunger and poverty. Embracing growth, development, science and technology. A voice of progress, a voice of unity. Watch Voice of the Global South with me, Akshay Dongre, only on DD India.
You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Sakal Button. Before we move on, let's do a quick recap of the top stories, the headlines. At this hour, Kenyan President William Ruto rejects controversial finance bill, sends it back to Parliament following violent protests across the country. Om Birla elected as Speaker of India's lower house again. Prime Minister of India Narendra Modi says 17th Lok Sabha under his leadership will be called a golden period in country's parliamentary history. And Indian markets at a new peak. Sensex Nifty settle at new all-time high. Julian Assange returns to Australia from Saipan as a free man after pleading guilty for violating US espionage law. Australia's Albanese thanks US and UK for their support. Well, Kenya's president on Wednesday withdrew planned tax rises, in a way bowing to pressure from protesters who had stormed parliament, launched demonstrations across the country and also threatened more action this week. President William Ruto said that he would not sign a finance bill including the hikes. A day after violent clashes between police and protesters at the assembly and nationwide left at least 23 people dead and scores wounded, according to medics. Now, Amish Mahajan of DD India gets us this report.
Nairobi streets were under heavy guard on Wednesday, a day after Kenya's worst protest in years left at least 23 people dead, when police opened fire on demonstrators trying to storm parliament over proposed tax hikes.
What the government did to deploy a lot of force on us, it wasn't good. Yeah, we are not happy about it because they killed our colleagues and fellow youths. It's not okay. It's very bad. We are demonstrating peacefully.
Meanwhile, Kenya's President William Ruto declined to sign a highly contentious finance bill that has sparked nationwide deadly protests and has sent it back to Parliament for amendments. The move comes a day after he condemned protests that he called an unprecedented attack on democracy.
Having reflected on the continuing conversation around the content of the Finance Bill 2024, and listening keenly to the people of Kenya who have said loudly that they want nothing to do with this Finance Bill 2024, I concede, and therefore I will not sign the 2024 Finance Bill, and it shall subsequently be withdrawn.
The Indian High Commission in Kenya's Nairobi issued an advisory for Indian nationals to exercise utmost caution, restrict non-essential movement and avoid the areas affected by the protests and violence till the situation clears up. Taking to X, the Commission said, in view of the prevailing tense situation, all Indians in Kenya are advised to exercise utmost caution, restrict non-essential movement and avoid the areas affected by the protests and violence till the situation clears up. The United States has condemned violence reported during protests in Nairobi. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller urged Kenya to show restraint and provide space for dialogue.
So we condemn the violence reported during protests in Nairobi and around Kenya. We mourn the loss of life and injuries sustained and offer our condolences to the families who lost loved ones. We urge restraint to restore order and provide space for dialogue.
The finance bill that brought unrest in the country has some provisions which protesters say would impose unaffordable tax rises on ordinary citizens and businesses already weighed down by the high cost of living. The bill initially proposed to introduce a 16% sales tax on bread and 25% duty on cooking oil, increase in tax on financial transactions as well as a new annual tax on vehicle ownership amounting to 2.5% of value of the vehicle. Charge on products that contribute to waste and harm environment was another key provision of the bill. 16% tax on goods and services for direct and exclusive use in construction and equipment of specialized hospitals with a minimum bed capacity of 50. Bill proposes to increase rate of import taxes from 2.5% to 3% of the value of the item to be paid by importer. Despite the deaths of several people, protesters vowed on Wednesday to keep up their demonstrations.
And for more updates from Kenya, we are joined by DD India's Daniel Kijo, joining us live from Tanzania on the broadcast. Thank you very much, Daniel. Now, first of all, first things first, bring us up to speed with the latest situation on ground. Has it eased a bit following Kenyan president conceding to the protesters?
Well, the president's speech conceding of what the Gen Z in Kenya have been pushing for the last 24 has resulted into mixed feelings.
Okay.
He spoke around 4 this afternoon. It's a couple of hours from when he spoke, but there's been a flood of responses from different groups, with some feeling that it is a good move and that it is about time that he changed his tone from the sort of approach that he had yesterday with talking about how the security organs would make sure they clamp down any criminals. Today he seemed more convincing for most, saying that he might be really reaching a turning point to listen to the youth of Kenya, the Gen Z who pushed this. But there have been sentiments of mistrust. Of course, opposition party were not happy and attacked his decisions at this time. There are some analysts who say that this is just a delaying tactic, that the parliament would pass the bill if the president does not sign in 21 days according to Kenyan law. So it is still up in the air for most, with a lot of youth saying conceding to not passing the bill is not enough. Some of them have been using the hashtag Ruto must go, saying that what they want now perhaps is for the president to go. So it is met by a lot of doubt from a lot of the youth and a lot of the social media that we have seen. Analysts say it is a good move, a good PR move. Others say it is genuine, but the youth online feel like it's just a delaying tactic.
There is a sort of parallel, in fact, more parallel narratives or rather perception building, which means that the conceding to the demands is only seen by his by the opposition and a certain section of society only for optics, and this could pave a way for his exit. Is that so?
That is what some of the sentiments online say, that if you review and look back at some of what the signs held by youth over the last 48 hours had hashtags saying Ruto must go. Now exactly what will happen tomorrow is yet to be seen, because the youth using WhatsApp groups and other social media platforms have been mobilizing to say that no matter what the president has said, tomorrow on Thursday they will continue to march to the State House, saying that they are not satisfied with what the president has issued, and saying that his speech yesterday.
Okay, yeah, you can finish that point. And also with that, so do we understand that with this televised address there is a certain clampdown as far as the protests and those tensions on the streets of Nairobi and elsewhere in Kenya is concerned? Very quickly.
Yes, the issue is there's still talk of Thursday. Thursday has been a day that after yesterday they said they would revive the protest. So it's yet to be seen over tonight what exactly will happen. But the feelings online for most of the Gen Z is that they do not feel that the president was genuine. So it is yet to be seen over the next perhaps 12 hours.
So his conceding, so-called, is not really cutting ice with the people by and large. Thank you very much. We'll leave it there, but we of course will be following the story very, very closely with you. Let me quickly welcome Ambassador Rahul Chhabra, former Indian envoy to Kenya, joining us on this show to talk about this developing situation in Kenya. Thank you very much, Ambassador Chhabra. So Namaste, sir. So when the president says, I concede and finance bill will be withdrawn, do you see this move is seen as a major win for a week-old protests or movement or mass rallies demanding a political overhaul in Kenya is concerned? Though I'm sure you heard our correspondent joining us from Tanzania. Well, as of now, prima facie, it doesn't seem so. There is no rest yet.
Good evening, Sadal.
Good evening,
thank you for having me on your show.
A pleasure.
Yes, that's true. It is a major sort of move by the president. I met President Ruto when he was vice president, when I was posted there. He's an astute politician. He sensed the feeling on the ground, and he's actually, I mean, even his choice of words, I mean, he's just said, I concede. So, you know, it's quite telling that it's not just a slight pullback. He's pretty much used the word concede. He's also sort of, in addition to saying that the bill will not be passed, he's also said that, look, let's look at other sort of options like austerity measures, tackle corruption. He said, I'll have consultations with multi-stakeholders in the social arena. So he's sort of, he's trying to obviously diffuse the situation because it had seemed to get out of ground with the police opening fire on these sort of protesters and the army being called in. And this major 1 million people march planned for tomorrow, which I think may not now go ahead.
So it may be seen as an immediate threat of more unrest, the way things are unfolding there, Ambassador. But this also is something leaving Ruto still caught between the demands of his citizens and of the lenders such as IMF, which is urging the government to cut deficits to obtain more financing. It's going to be a very, I mean, it's a tight walk for him. It's a precarious position for Ruto.
Exactly. It's a very tightrope walk, and nearly half of Kenya's debt is from the multilateral lenders. But I'm told that they are willing to show some sort of flexibility in the way they will go ahead. But there's some sort of lot of bilateral debt also, and China is one of the largest bilateral creditors to Kenya, and they've funded some huge infrastructure projects, railways, ports, highways. In fact, the railway line which runs parallel to the line that the Indians set up over 100 years ago. So it's quite a significant new rail line that opened a few years back. So all these debts are now coming in for repayment. So that's where the pressure is mounting. So I think President Ruto is sort of caught between these two. And these aren't debts that his government took on because he's only been in power for less than 2 years. So I think he will have to really play it very well.
Okay, he's also spoken about striking a dialogue today in the televised address, specific messaging to the youth. But a reporter from Tanzania tells us that it's not really, in fact, it's become sort of a social media campaign, setting some narrative that this could be a reason paving way for his exit. Well, he's trying to infuse some peace with the promises or this whole conceding thing, but it's not really working with the youngsters, the Gen Z of Kenya.
Yeah, that's true. You never know what motivates and what sort of the Gen Z nowadays. But let's see. I mean, Ruto is no babe in the woods. I'm sure he's got his pulse on the ground. So he will be looking at it closely and sort of trying to do whatever he can. Because he's got another 3 years to go in his term. So he's not even halfway through his term. He's a really seasoned politician. So I would see him sort of diffusing the situation, reaching out, making reach out to the different sort of leaders. But the significant part here is that doesn't seem to be really any real leadership of the movement. This is, as I said, it's just from TikTok, Facebook, WhatsApp. People are just coming onto the streets. So it's a little difficult to handle this. So let us see how he does it. Tomorrow will be a big test because whether this 1 million march actually does take place or it fizzles out tomorrow.
Okay. Finally, sir, if you could just also help us understand, since you understand the Kenyan system, parliamentary system so well, what is the fate of this bill now? He said that he would not sign the finance bill. He has sent it back to the parliament, but in his televised address, he's not really spelled out a clean plan how he's going to, go forward from here. What's going to be the parallel measures he's going to take?
He didn't spell it out in concrete terms, but he did mention like there will be austerity measures. He will look at cutting down on corruption and sort of therefore try to raise revenues from the tax authorities. He'll engage with the other stakeholders. So it's a very general sort of thing.
Very general, very fluid sort of statements, very generic.
But then that's politics, and it's happening so quickly. So he's got to get out of today's situation and then see how he actually comes down to meeting the budgetary figures and the budgetary targets. This can give him some breathing time and breathing space because this is what he needs at the moment. Because all this has been happening in the course of, a few hours. So between morning and afternoon is difficult for him to actually come out with concrete proposals of how he'll raise that revenue. And he doesn't need to. As long as he manages to diffuse today's situation, sees through tomorrow and over the weekend, and then I think they'll look at different options of revenue raising. They might even go back to some of these, but not raise it by this amount. You know, there are always all sorts of things that you can play around with.
Yes, we'll have to really see tomorrow how it pans out. He's reached out to his constituency, to his people, but will that be enough in terms of containing the simmering unrest on ground, which has left more than 20 people dead? Many thanks, Ambassador Chabra. Such a pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you. In other news, 16 Nobel Prize-winning economists have said that Trump policies will fuel inflation in US. They jointly signed letters send out a warning that the US and world economy will suffer if Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump wins the US presidential polls in November. It added that the economic agenda of US President Joe Biden, a Democrat, is vastly superior to Trump's, the former Republican president seeking a second term. The economists say Trump's economic plans would reignite inflation in part because of his pledge to impose stiffer tariffs on Chinese imports, which they say will hike prices on many goods bought by US consumers. And now let's take a look at the other stories making news. New Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal sent to 3-day CBI custody by Delhi court on Wednesday, hours after he was arrested by the central agency in connection with the money laundering probe into now scrapped excise policy. The agency says a Delhi Chief Minister was required to be confronted with evidence and other people accused in the case. Reserve Bank of India has said that India is at the threshold of a major structural shift in its growth trajectory and is moving towards 8% GDP growth in a sustained manner. RBI also mentioned that India's growth will be multi-sectoral, driven by various structural reforms, and with the goods and the services tax being at the forefront. The Indian Meteorological Department on Wednesday said that the rainfall activity is likely to increase over northwest India, with heavy to very heavy rainfall expected during June 28 to 30th. Monsoons are delayed by about a week compared to its normal trajectory. It slowed down for around 9 days after June 11. Two terrorists were killed during an encounter with security forces in a forest area in Jammu and Kashmir's Doordarshan district on Wednesday. Intensified search operations and cordon operations by the police along with Indian Army and the Central Reserve Police Force followed the twin terror attacks in Hilli district earlier on June 11th and 12th. India's Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar presided over as the chief guest at the Golden Jubilee celebrations of Central Electronics Limited in Ghaziabad in the state of Uttar Pradesh today. Recalling the dark days of emergency, Vice President asserted the days of emergency will never be seen again as the constitutional democracy is very strong in India. And still to come on DD India News Hour. Coming up next, Afghanistan to lock horns with South Africa in the first semis of the T20 World Cup 2024 in early hours on Thursday. Hockey star Harmanpreet Singh is all set to captain the Indian squad at the upcoming Paris Olympics.
Voice of a rising aspirational world. Stories of challenges, struggles and accomplishment. A world battling conflict, hunger and poverty. Embracing growth, development, science and technology. A voice of progress, a voice of unity. Watch Voice of the Global South with me, Akshay Dongre, only on DD India.
You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Sakal Bhatt. Russia has begun its espionage trial of the reporter Ivan Gershkovich in a secret hearing on Wednesday. The Wall Street Journal reporter was arrested last year while on a reporting trip in the city of Yekaterinburg. He was later accused of spying for the CIA. The Russian prosecutor in the trial of Ivan claimed to have proofs of the reporter collecting secrets about a Russian defense enterprise for the US CIA. Further, the Kremlin says any possible prison exchange involving Gershkovich would need to be agreed in public silence and that people must wait for the case's verdict. In a major landmark in its economic recovery, Sri Lanka has reached a final restructuring agreement for its external debt that it owes to its bilateral creditors. The crisis-stricken island nation had defaulted on its external debt commitments in April 2022 during its worst ever economic crisis. With the assistance from Indian side and the International Monetary Fund's financing package and government's policy interventions, Sri Lanka has been making efforts to revive the economy. Experts believe that the debt restructuring is a key step in rebuilding Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, a memorandum of understanding between Sri Lanka and the Official Creditor Committee of Official Bilateral Lenders with France, India and Japan as co-chairs of Official Creditor Committee was signed today. Sri Lanka has also signed debt treatment agreement with Export-Import Bank of China to restructure $4.2 billion of its debt. A SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket launched the fourth and final satellite of NASA and NOAA's next generation geostationary weather satellite from Kennedy Space Center on Tuesday. The GOES-U, that is the GOES-U satellite, is designed to enhance weather monitoring capabilities across the Western Hemisphere. Shortly after the launch, the rocket's twin boosters executed a precision landing back at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. You're watching DD India. Coming up next is some sports news. Up first, cricket. Afghanistan will lock horns with South Africa in the first semis of the T20 World Cup 2024 in the early hours of Thursday. In the other semi, Rohit Sharma's India will be up against South Africa at the Providence Stadium in Guyana on Thursday. On Tuesday, the Afghans added a new chapter to their history books after securing their maiden semi-final berth in the history of tournament. They defeated Bangladesh by 8 runs via Duckworth-Lewis method in Kingston, St. Vincent in their last and final Super 8 clash. And earlier, India also beat Australia by 24 runs on Monday at the Darren Sami National Cricket Stadium in St. Lucia and confirmed their berth in the top 4. The men in blue will look to avenge their 10-wicket defeat to England in the semi-finals of the T20 World Cup 2024 at the Adelaide Oval. The Three Lions are expected to pose a challenge as they will be high on confidence after their massive win over the United States. Hockey star Harmanpreet Singh is all set to captain the Indian squad at the upcoming Paris Olympics as Hockey India announces squad for the major tournament. With 5 Olympic debutants in the squad, Hardik Singh will be the vice-captain. The squad also features a veteran goalkeeper PR Shrijesh and midfielder Manpreet Singh, most of whom will be making their 4th Olympic appearance. And interestingly, Jarmanpreet Singh, Sanjay, Raj, Kumar, Pal, Abhishek and Sukhjit Singh are the 5 players who are all set to make their Olympic debut in Paris. India's Anusha Agarwal is all set to make his historic debut at the upcoming Paris Olympics as he has been chosen by the Equestrian Federation of India to represent India in the dressage event at the upcoming Paris Games. Interestingly, this also marks India's first ever entry in the dressage event at the Olympics, as riders have previously only competed in eventing categories. Agarwal's selection came after a careful evaluation of recent performances where he edged out close contender Shruti Vora based on a better average score. And India men's deaf cricket team defeated England men's deaf team in the IT20 series, with the game still to come in the deaf cricket summer series. There were 2 matches that were played on the same day, and an all-round domination display saw India winning both the matches, and win takes a 4-2 lead in the 7-match series. In the 5th T20, India men's deaf chased and defeated England by 8 wickets, chasing down England's target of 135 runs. In the 6th T20, India defeated England by 55 runs. The last T20 will be played on 27th of June.
पहले जो मैच हुआ था उसको में भी हमने काफ़ी अच्छा स्कोर किया था, लेकिन थोड़ा सा कमी यहाँ पड़ गई कि हमारे पास एक बॉलर कम था, स्पिनर कम पड़ गया था, क्योंकि यहाँ के जो इंग्लैंड के प्लेयर हैं वो स्पिनर वो कम खेल पाते हैं। तो फिर हमने फिर से प्लानिंग किया कि हमने 4 स्पिनर अपनी टीम में खिलाए, क्योंकि जो इंग्लैंड के प्लेयर हैं वो पेसर को अच्छा सा खेले थे, लेकिन उन्हें स्पिनर समझ में नहीं आती। साथ में दोनों मैचों में हमने प्लानिंग किया था कि जो भी ओपनर हैं वो स्टार्ट बहुत तेज देंगे और पूरा फील्डिंग बैटिंग सभी ने एक तरफा सपोर्ट किया। तो ये जीत केवल मेरी एक अकेले की नहीं है, पूरे भारत की जीत है और हमें प्राउड है कि हम भारतीय हैं।
Yes, proud Indian there. And that's it in this edition of DD India News Hour. But let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. For those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on DD India mobile application. This app is available on both Android and iOS platforms, and scan the QR code on the screen to download now. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Sakal Bhatt, and from all of us here in Delhi, thanks for watching DD India News Hour.